I got into every school I applied to last year, so let's read the essay that got me in and talk about how you can do the same. Hi, my name's Adelia, and last year I applied to 7 colleges and got into every single one of them, including Stanford, Cornell, Berkeley, and UCLA. My personal statement is something I am extremely proud of. It encapsulates my identity, who I am, how I became who I am, and who I want to be in life, and I hope that sharing this statement and talking about how I wrote it can maybe help you do the same with your personal statement. Do you think I can do this in one take? I idolize anarchists. I admire the careless, unsophisticated, aggressive people of the world. I cherish the way these seemingly selfish people come together to fight for selfless causes. I am punk rock. I grew up as a second-generation punk rocker, taught everything I know by my parents, who gave their lives to punk rock as unruly teens. I treasure memories of my brother and me pretending to know the words to Should I Stay or Should I Go by The Clash on early morning drives to elementary school. Around 4th grade, I began really listening to the lyrics of the punk rock music I grew up with. I learned it wasn't just music my parents raised me on. It was our ideology, lifestyle, and culture. The dichotomy of my culture rests in individuality versus community. I've learned that to be truly punk rock is to do what I love for myself and do what needs to be done for others. As paradoxical as it sounds, this counterculture filled with radical, eccentric people taught me the importance of the kindness and respect through our core value of activism. I'm inspired by artists like NoFX's Fat Mike and Sex Pistols' Johnny Rotten, who use their platforms to speak out against the issues they find most pressing in the world. I find beauty in my own punk rock identity. Unconventional to mainstream punk rock, yet conventional to common man. A dichotomy within a dichotomy. As a second-generation punk rocker, I'll be a first-generation college student. I inherited my punk rock lifestyle, but in true nonconformist fashion, I've applied myself to a future unique to mainstream punk rock. My paradoxical identity has written my future as an environmentalist, statistician, and changemaker. Fueled by punk rock activism, after embracing the core values of my culture, I looked for where I saw the biggest lack of kindness and respect. Littered hiking trails, smoggy mornings, and scorched Smoky Mountain forest screamed at me for help. As I entered middle school, those Smoky Mountains, my backyard, endured annihilating wildfires. My middle school STEM program, collaborating with NASA, developed a mission to analyze regrowth of those wildfires in 2016. The mission was RamSat, a small cube satellite with cameras to capture images of the Smokies. When I was old enough to join RamSat in 2019, it had dwindled to about a dozen students and a few mentors from Oak Ridge National Laboratory. In true punk rock fashion, I pursued what I love, ignoring the option to conform, joining this small, niche group of students to develop RamSat. I joined the RamSat team in time to solder its wires, watch a SpaceX rocket launch from Cape Canaveral with RamSat inside, watch as RamSat was deployed from the ISS, and converse with RamSat through our ham radio. It felt surreal. Like my rebellious punk rock spirit bonded with scientific precision, creating a space where my unique upbringing thrived in a real-life scientific scene. The 4 years I spent engineering and programming RamSat were fascinating, but in 2023, when I finally got my hands on RamSat's images of the Smokies, my world changed. At this point, of the 93 students who contributed to RamSat, I was the only one left. I found beauty in this reality. Being the sole remaining student, one raised in counterculture, willing to see this mission to the end. I was rewarded with using image data and calculations to substantiate regrowth of my beloved forests. I fell in love with this process, using statistics to draw conclusions about environmental issues. This process has become my future, all thanks to punk rock's inspiration. I live in dichotomy. As a nonconformist, I find comfort in a future that is foreign to, yet inspired by, the careless, unsophisticated, aggressive people of the world. As an activist, I find comfort in a future living for 2 causes, my environment and my punk rock culture. So let's talk about it. My goal with this essay was to make admissions officers understand who I am and the identity that I've developed through this unique kind of culture that I grew up with. For some context, here's a couple of pictures of my parents when they were younger. They definitely are the inspiration to the punk rock identity I've grown up with and come to embrace and love. If I were to use one word to describe my goal with my essay, it would be to be bold. I start this kind of bold idea right off the bat with my hook. The idea of starting my essay with the fact that I idolize anarchists, I feel, is It's a very bold statement, but it's also something that's very true and something that's very personal to me. I feel like my first paragraph in general does a really good job of prefacing the essay without actually telling the admissions officer exactly what I'm going to be talking about throughout my essay. Obviously, a large topic during my essay is going to be punk rock, and I tell the admissions officer that right off the bat. They already know that that's something that I'm going to be talking about in my essay, but I don't reveal the message that I'm going to tell or the lesson that I'm going to learn at the end of the story. I just kind of begin by saying, this is what I'm going to be talking about, but I do it in a fun and unique and creative and bold way. From there, I start with my story. I give a little bit of information about my parents because obviously they are a huge inspiration to my identity. And then from there, I go on to talk about a little anecdote of my brother and I when we were little. And then from there, I kind of tell this story of how I came to understand what punk rock really was, and that it wasn't just this musical thing that my parents were showing us. It was kind of their identity that they came to love. There aren't any really crazy metaphors throughout this section. It's more of just a story, like this is how I came to understand who I am and how this sort of idea that I have about the world came about. I know a lot of essays have this kind of overarching metaphor that structures their entire essay.
I hate the letter S.
And while I do think that punk rock can maybe be seen as a metaphor in this essay, it's definitely not like a very bold metaphor like you see in other essays. I think the biggest sort of like metaphor sort of thing that comes into play in my essay is this idea that I am living in a dichotomy within a dichotomy. So after I tell this story about who I am and how I kind of came to hold this identity and hold this idea about the world, I then go in and talk about what this made me do. I think it's really important to mention some sort of action when you're talking about your identity in an essay. And I think your personal statement is something that you can 1000% just talk about your identity all day long in this essay, but you have to have some sort of story that represents, this is what I've done with this identity and what I've done with the values that I hold and what I've done with who I am and how I've come to be who I am. So I go in to say that this paradoxical identity, this dichotomy within a dichotomy, has brought me to become an environmentalist, statistician, and change maker. And from there you kind of get the first glimpse into what I'm going to be talking about in the essay in terms of who I want to be in the future. This essay also clearly outlines kind of what I want to do with the rest of my life, and that's not something that's completely necessary in a college essay. That's something that I just decided to include in my essay because I felt that it was very central to my person and who I want to be in the future. So this paragraph overarchingly is more of just like a transition paragraph from my identity to what I've done with my identity. So then we go into the meat of the sort of story of what I've done with my identity, which we begin to talk about RamSat. If you want to read a little more about RamSat, I will link the website in my description. So throughout this paragraph, while I am talking about RamSat and I'm talking about what I did and kind of what the sort of project is, I also have a few spots where I tie in that overarching theme of punk rock within that paragraph rather than just talking about RamSat the whole entire time. Overarchingly, this part of the essay is more of just context to the project that I'm going to be talking about in the next paragraph, because the next paragraph is where I really begin to explain how this experience has shaped me. So again, this paragraph is just kind of explaining the experience as some context. So this next paragraph is where I tell the admissions officer what I actually learned and what I took away from this experience. So I try to emphasize in this paragraph that yes, I learned what I want to do with the rest of my life, but I also held that punk rock activism close, near, and dear to my heart while I was going through this whole experience with RamSat. And finally, we have my conclusion where I bring back that idea of this dichotomy within a dichotomy, this kind of paradoxical identity that I have. And it doesn't take a lot. I literally just said I live in dichotomy. I talk about what I learned as a nonconformist from this experience and from my life, and then I talk about what I've learned as an activist from this experience and from my life. So let's talk about how this essay kind of fit into my larger application as a whole. So we learned a little bit about RamSat, which was definitely a big part of my application, a big part of something that I was very proud of, and one of my extracurriculars that I think did make me stand out as an applicant. Basically, all of my extracurriculars were STEM related. I had a couple of research extracurriculars. I had one really big leadership extracurricular. I had a passion project extracurricular. I was in sports. I ran cross country and track. I didn't have any extracurriculars about punk rock or anything. That was more of just kind of my identity and the thing that I wanted to write about in my personal statement. But I do think that the whole environmental aspect, the whole activism aspect is very clear within my other extracurriculars that admissions officers would be seeing in my application. I think mainly my extracurriculars and my course load were all very, very, very STEM heavy, very STEM related, and it made it very clear kind of that I wanted to integrate environmental science with mathematics and like statistics in that sort of way. So I'm done talking about myself. Let's talk about you and how you can learn from what I did in my essay. So in my essay, I made a very big emphasis on not trying to sound smart or not trying to sound impressive or anything. I just tried to sound like myself. Something that really helped me with this was public speaking in high school. I learned how to write about myself by giving like campaign speeches and stuff, and I think that additionally campaign speeches are like convincing people to vote for me. So in your college essay, you're literally convincing an admissions officer to like vote for you. You learn all of these things in high school, especially in AP Lang, which you should totally take if you haven't, about how to use like these rhetorical devices and things to convey your message and to convince people of things. And I think all of those things that you learn when you're in these English classes are so important when you're writing an essay like this, because overarchingly the purpose of this essay is, yes, to kind of explain who you are, but also to convince an admissions officer to let you into their school. So don't try to sound smart, don't try to sound like someone you're not, don't try to sound like the perfect applicant, just try to sound like yourself. Another big thing when you're writing this essay is to emphasize showing, not telling. To do this, I have some big no-nos when it comes to college essays, and that includes never using these two big no-no words, which are passion and learn. In my eyes, these words are telltale indicators that you are telling me something rather than showing it to me. You're telling me I have a passion for this, or you're telling me my passion grew. Instead of using a story or an anecdote or an event or a reflection that shows me that you have that passion, or that you grew that passion. And the same thing goes for learning something. You shouldn't be telling me I learned this. You should be telling me what you did with what you learned. And if you tell me what you did with what you learned, I can imply that you learned it because you changed. I need to check my TikTok. I have 99 plus notifications. Do you see that? Freaking love when that happens. Another really big piece of advice that I have is to use your voice. And by that, I mean to make choices in your essay. We can be so deep into this rabbit hole of reading other people's college essays and being like, I can't write like that. I can't do it, and I'm never gonna get into school, and I'm gonna end up homeless on the street, and everything's gonna be awful, and I should just drop out of high school now. Which is not true. You just don't have the same voice as they do. You don't have the same voice as anybody on this entire planet, so why should you be trying to have the same voice as somebody who had a successful college essay when you have your own unique voice? And remember, college admissions officers are looking for unique students to contribute to their campus, so using that unique voice could help you at some point. So when I talk about voice, I mean kind of the style that you write in, the choices that you make throughout your essay that make it unique and that make it have this sort of tone and mood and all of those fun English words that you learned throughout high school. Your voice is so powerful, and it's something that you can use to your advantage when you're writing a college essay. Another thing I wanted to point out was my essay didn't include some crazy dramatic event that made me who I am today. My college essay is more of just a story of who I am, and I told it in such a way that made it very successful. So if you leave this video with one piece of advice and one thing you remember, I want it to be that you don't need to have a crazy story. You just need to tell yours well. So luckily for you, I offer college essay help services. They're linked in my description. I offer editing and brainstorming, and you should totally go check it out if you need a little bit of help. You should totally like this video. Subscribe if you want to see more college essay help and whatnot, and Stanford content, and all of those fun college things that I know you really want to see. Follow my TikTok in the description. Comment down below what kind of other essay help you need and what other kind of content you would love to see. And share this with a friend who needs help with their college essay, because hopefully maybe it could help them a little bit. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.